Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a very, very warm welcome to this St. Gallen Wings of Excellence ceremony for the award. And for many people, at least for 3 people here, this is one of the highlights of the symposium. The theme of the competition this year was entrepreneurs, agent of change, and we formulated specifically 4 topics that should sort of motivate and inspire the students to write. The first is, what makes an entrepreneur an agent of change? Secondly, changing the guard, who are the new entrepreneurs? Thirdly, corporate entrepreneurship in large companies, a concept for the future or a pie in the sky? And then fourthly, entrepreneurship between environmental risks and opportunities, what does it take to succeed? On a personal note, I have to say that this is the most exciting competition that I've personally ever been involved with. And there are 3 reasons for this. First of all, the topic of entrepreneurship is very impactful and it's also very urgent. And secondly, we changed the rules of the game for this particular competition. We actually solicited essays from graduate students and postgraduate students who had been exposed to more academic training. And that certainly enhanced the quality of the essays. And it also comes in addition that many of these students actually had personal entrepreneurial experience on which they could actually draw upon when they wrote their essays. And the 4th reason is actually that the competition was immense. We actually got almost twice as many essays for this year's competition compared to last year's competition. You have to imagine people from 200 universities worldwide representing 68 nationalities competed for this essay competition for the St. Gallen Wings of Excellence Award. So this is really very, very interesting. We had a little, in the jury, we had a little sort of hidden agenda behind the competition. Of course, we want to sort of inspire people to write and write excellently, as we will see some examples of. But we also hope through this competition to actually motivate people to think entrepreneurially. And if you think about it, there are certain connections between entrepreneurship and writing. Perhaps the first connection is actually in change, or the objective to change something. Writers want to change the way that people think about the world. And entrepreneurs, they want to change the way that people actually act in the world. So this objective of changing something, I think, is connecting the 2. There is one more thing which might be a little bit more subtle, and drawing on a lesson that we got from Aristotle, he taught us that you are what you repeatedly do. So he said that, excellence is not an act, but it is a habit. So very, very good writers, they write a lot, I think, in order to be really good. And good entrepreneurs, they innovate a lot. Innovation is the instrument, like Peter Drucker said, of entrepreneurship. You'll see 3 really excellent speakers today, and you'll hear about 3 really excellent essays. And we start with the 3rd prize winner, which is Christoph Birkholz. Christoph was born in Germany and is currently a Ph.D. student at the Institute of Ecology and Economy here at the University of St. Gallen. He focuses his research on energy provision in developing countries. And Christoph's essay was called Facilitating a New Breed of Entrepreneurs, the emergence of a global movement. And here he draws specifically on his own personal experiences with a concept which is called the hub. It's a very interesting concept where entrepreneurs from different disciplines and with different resources, with different interests, come together to sort of motivate each other to do entrepreneurship. And the jury felt specifically that this essay represented a great combination of very, very good ideas, reflections on some personal experience that Christoph has been involved in, and also a truly interesting case study on the hub. Christoph, the stage is yours. We're looking very much forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor von Krogh. What a great honor to be standing here in front of this amazing group of people. as Professor von Krogh said, I just started my PhD here at University of St. Gallen, and now I have actually the chance to present my very personal essay at this stage. Thank you very much, of course, to the ISC. I think you've done a great job so far, and I look forward for the rest of the day, and of course, for this session as well. Ladies and gentlemen, dear entrepreneurs, I'm part of a new generation of entrepreneurs, and we are united in the pursuit to create something new, something valuable to the world, something sustainable. We want to go beyond financial returns, and we are driven by the creation of true value in society. Of course, entrepreneurs like us have always been around, but this time it is different. We are going mainstream, and we gain momentum. Entrepreneurship will not be dominated by economic profit orientation any longer. It is more. It goes far beyond. It is a new breed of entrepreneurs. But is it really that new? We all know Muhammad Yunus and Vikram Akula, who help eradicate poverty through access to microfinance. Organizations like Kiva.org innovate money lending as they connect small-scale money lenders with under-resourced entrepreneurs. This is amazing. These new entrepreneurs tackle challenges that might even exceed the complexity faced by those who seek financial returns only. In fact, they're incredibly innovative. In order to change the rules, they have to be. So where's the challenge? Despite existing entrepreneurs who successfully combine economic and environmental and social objectives, there are two challenges remaining. First, we keep referring to those star entrepreneurs, the usual suspects who have succeeded in what had been considered impossible. Yes, these stories are inspiring and very important. However, we lack to identify what enabled these success stories across the globe. Where are the fertile grounds for a global movement to emerge? Where's the systemic change we need? That is a challenge for entrepreneurs, for researchers, for politicians, for all of us. Second, there's this field emerging, and we've heard it many times, social entrepreneurship. That is, we tend to refer to a small group of entrepreneurs actually at the margins of entrepreneurship. It somehow releases all the other ones from generating social impact. It distorts a holistic perception of entrepreneurship, driven by a pursuit to alter the status quo, be it in their local environment or on a global scale. I claim that all entrepreneurs share this common DNA of creating social, ecological, and economic value. If entrepreneurship is about generating this impact, it is these value creators who I call the new entrepreneurs. We are new entrepreneurs because we approach social and ecological challenges in a financially sustainable way, and not the other way around. These claims sound inspiring and motivating to some, but we must not get lost in visionary idealism. Let us be crystal clear about what it takes for a new breed of entrepreneurs to create true value in society. Too often we've been misleadingly urged to sacrifice social objectives for economic ones, trade-offs that do not necessarily exist. I'm convinced that we can overcome these relicts. But what is needed to do so? Well, we need to be both locally embedded and globally connected, without excluding those, of course, who struggle to perceive themselves as social entrepreneurs. It requires an inclusive movement of like-minded people around the world. Collectively, we can develop a powerful common voice. We can create legitimacy for ourselves and all our fellows who dream of their own social startup, envisioning a better world. Just imagine this new form of mainstream entrepreneurship would be as widely acknowledged as a career opportunity with McKinsey or Google or the United Nations. Imagine what would be possible. And yet, legitimacy and networks are not enough. Innovative ideas have always been around, but we require resources and infrastructure, knowledge, experience to make this happen. We need workspaces, offices maybe, designed to suit the purposes of our ventures. We need physical places where a global community gathers locally, a place where the community emerges and develops. It is a personal meeting where we persuade impact investors and business angels and venture capitalists. For a truly global community, we need a physical location where those who consider themselves not only as social or sustainable entrepreneurs, but straightforward, new entrepreneurs. It is for those who want to become a part of the movement, those idealistic students just joining the scene and just becoming part of the professional life, as well as for the stars of the scene. When Ellen O'Connor proposes the articulation of a rather local and modest type of social entrepreneurship, rather than high profile and professional, I suggest the implementation of both. For a new breed of entrepreneurs to emerge globally, it needs more than a municipal initiative, more than a regional incubator, more than a local phenomenon. It needs hundreds of those places across the globe. Only then will we pioneer the becoming entrepreneurial of the society. This vision is not only possible, it is happening. It is the emergence of the global network that we call the Hub. In 25 cities around the world, a movement that started in London not even 5 years ago provides a habitat for social entrepreneurs and social innovation and proves a revolution of entrepreneurship. Hubs in Amsterdam and in San Francisco, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Stockholm, Tel Aviv, Vienna, and many more places have been hosting over 5,000 new entrepreneurs. Working from hubs, they founded those ethical supply chains with fabric producers from Kenya. And we've met Faisal Rahman yesterday, who started Fair Finance from the hub in London. Hub members have designed vertical inner city wind turbines, today funded by Europe's major clean technology venture capitalists. And with hubs emerging in places as diverse as Kabul, Shanghai, Riga, and Bogota, and another 60 hubs in the making, this network aims to host more than 100,000 new entrepreneurs by 2015. 100,000. In fact, more than McKinsey and more than the United Nations. Imagine the power of this movement. In hubs, we find flexible co-working spaces, inspiring meeting rooms, supportive atmosphere, and relaxing retreats. It is a place to work, to get things done, but also to meet and to connect. When new entrepreneurs are encouraged to realize their intent, it is an ecosystem of social innovation. People from every profession, background, and culture are invited to come to the hub, and there they can connect with those sustainable entrepreneurs, idealistic students, with social intrapreneurs from corporate life, and from career shifters for a global movement to emerge. Events are hosted at hubs in order to fuel connections, capital, experience, and to market opportunities. And altogether, there are teams in more than 80 extraordinary places spread across 6 continents that are either conceiving, building, or running hubs in order to host a multitude of new entrepreneurs. And if you let me, I'd like to finish my story with just one of them. It's a co-founding of the hub Zurich. It's my story. So we don't need to travel far for this. We can actually stay here right at this symposium. In fact, when I participated it 2 years ago as a student sitting on the other side, there was Michel Bachmann also attending the symposium. And not 1 year later, Michel was the driving force of bringing the hub project to Zurich. And he brought me in the co-founding team. Niels Roth is amongst the audience today and was there last year. This symposium has this special magic about bringing together a unique blend of amazing people. We establish physical connections here through personal meeting, and it facilitates the get-together of what we like to call unlikely allies. This is young and old, business and politics, this is experience and talents, this is leaders of today and leaders of tomorrow. With the Hub Zurich opening this September, we envision this collaborative environment for new entrepreneurs, not once a year, but every single day. but every single day to exchange ideas, make connections, and co-develop and implement innovative solutions for a radically better world. Imagine what would happen if you didn't travel home tomorrow, but stayed here to further develop the ideas you've been discussing the last 2 days with all those amazing people around you. Imagine how fast we could move things all of a sudden. Imagine this creative energy of fresh mindsets, not only for profit, but for purpose. Just imagine you came to the hub. Ladies and gentlemen, new entrepreneurs are already there, and new entrepreneurs will follow. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Excellent, thanks. Very good, thank you. You know, sometimes it's really very, very hard to be part of a jury and then trying to sort of choose between a first and a second prize to actually find the winner, and the second prize is very, very difficult. And in this particular case, of this particular competition, this particular year, it turned out to be an impossible task. So the jury actually ended up with awarding the first prize to 2 papers. They are very different, and the authors' backgrounds are also very different. They have very different focus areas. They talk about different things. But nevertheless, the quality of each of the essays are distinctly much, much higher than all of the other essays we saw. So we actually decided to go for a split of the first prize on 2 people. And the first person out here today is Mr. James Clear. And James was born in the United States of America. He's an MBA student at Fisher College of Business at Ohio State University. And he studied biomechanics, undergraduate studies, which is very good, I think, also for entrepreneurship, right? If you want to go into that area later. His true love, however, is baseball, and he's played baseball at the college level, very professional, for 17 years. But he combines this very rough, tough sport with poetry, right? writing poems. And actually, it turns out that James, I don't know if it's under a pseudonym, but James' poetry has actually appeared in creative writing magazines in the US. And this might actually be one of the reasons why his essay is so well composed and so well written. The winner essay is entitled How to Become an Agent of Change. And the jury felt that this essay was not only well written, but it was also effectively grounded actually in the current academic debate on entrepreneurship. A lot of the studies going on at the moment you actually relate to, refer back to, and also criticize. And it's also containing a very, very interesting case of a surgeon who actually became an entrepreneur. So with no further ado, James, please take the stage. We're very happy to hear what you have to say.
Thank you. This has been amazing, hasn't it? I mean, I've been blown away, truthfully, and I feel very privileged to be here, to be honest, and very privileged to speak. And we have a couple previous winners in the audience, and so I figured I would take the chance to talk to them and maybe figure out, what I should say when I get up here. And I was speaking to one, and he told me that I should do something memorable, like sing and dance. And I was hoping that speaking would be memorable enough, but I guess not. And so I asked him, well, what did you do when you came up? And he said, I fainted. So I've been more confident going into speeches than this. Yeah. But before I say anything else, I just want to thank Dr. von Krogh, the jury, everyone, our distinguished guests, you guys for coming and making it what it is, truthfully. It's been a great experience, and if I haven't met you yet, please come down and see me afterwards. I'd love to be introduced to you. It's been a wonderful experience. And I'd like to thank our speakers as well. The panelists have been wonderful. You guys have been inspiring with your stories, or depressing if you haven't started a business at age 5. But above and beyond everything, I would like to thank the ISC committee. You guys have been wonderful. I know that you put in a ton of effort throughout the year to make this thing run like clockwork, and you work so diligently behind the scenes, and you don't get to enjoy it the way that a lot of us do. So on behalf of the whole symposium, I just want to thank you guys and go back and let everybody know that we sincerely appreciate all the effort you provide. Is that a signal that I should stop here? um, I want to be clear that I don't have any answers. So I came with statements and stories, and I hope that those will provoke a little bit of thought beyond just entrepreneurship and maybe about what it means to be an agent of change. And in the essay, and I hope you all get a chance to read it and read it every night before you go to bed, but I outline a framework for becoming an agent of change, and there's these 5 steps, and I use a real-world example of the company to sort of be a case study, so to speak, of the ideas in practice. But today, I noticed that we've had some impressive entrepreneurs come up, and none of them have used my framework. So I figure that you don't need me to tell you how to become an agent of change, but it might be more important for us to talk about what it means to be an agent of change. And so to do that, I have 3 things I'd like to talk about: creativity, risk, and giving back. And if you could leave here understanding those 3 things, then I'll consider the next 10 minutes or so a success. So being an agent of change means recognizing and cultivating the skill of creativity. And to my mind, what separates a lot of people, the extraordinary people, the agents of change, from the rest of the pack is the fact that they view things in an unconventional light. They're willing to look at things in a slightly different manner. And creativity, in my mind, is one of these items. Why does being an agent of change mean that you need to embrace creativity? First of all, I think it's because agents of change deal with problems, big problems, and creativity solves problems. Now, I think it's easy enough to recognize that, but I have an issue with kind of how we go about developing creativity. And while it may not be the pervading view in this room, I think society as a whole often views creativity as some type of God-given ability. We think it's an innate talent, and that being a creative person is either something you are or are not. But that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, and I think the problem is we look at creativity as an event and not necessarily a process. We're waiting for that eureka moment, that crucible feeling that when the light bulb turns on, all of a sudden you have the answer, and we think that if you don't sit down and immediately draw like Da Vinci or paint like Picasso, then you must not have the creative gene. But I think that the system's backwards. Creativity is a skill, just like anything else. It needs to be developed. It relies on continual attempts at getting better. And so I'd like for us to kind of look at this in a slightly different light and think about calculus for a second. I know you probably don't want to, but let's pretend that you do. And there's a lot of time between doing the first derivative and mastering the skill, so to speak. And just because you put a lot of work into math, we don't necessarily put a lot of work into creativity. And I don't understand that from a perspective that I realize that some people are better at math than others. But I think that we can still solve problems by working harder or longer, and creativity is the same way. We often dismiss it without really thinking about how we could work at it more. And this statement may not apply to entrepreneurs, but I think it does apply to agents of change, especially those in the public sector, or we've talked a lot about entrepreneurial thinking in large companies. And I think one of the reasons for this is because we respect visual literacy less than we respect actual literacy. Now, visual literacy is a foundational component of creativity. It's the reason that we like or hate an advertisement, why we appreciate a painting, why I turn around when a tall blonde walks by me. And it allows us to interpret the world around us. And the important part about visual literacy is not that it allows us to interpret the world, but that it allows us to transfer our technical knowledge, our skills and expertise into a more appealing medium. It's the reason why Apple computers and Ferrari cars are not both highly performing, but also highly appealing. And Koenigsegg cars. I don't want to offend anybody in the room, since I know we have some parties here. Let me get my place real quick. Oh, and then I also think that it's simple to dismiss this, right? To say that Apple has more creative people at their company, and that's the reason why they're able to do what they do. But if you think that that's okay, but I think that the merger between creativity and business knowledge, the merger between visual literacy and technical competence, is what allows you to stay on the forefront of business, to be a leader. And I think that we can all agree that to be an agent of change, you have to be a leader. And so for that reason, I think that developing creativity as a skill is something that is critical for becoming an agent of change. So point 1 is that you need to develop the skill of creativity. Point 2 deals with risk. Now, I believe that between ordinary acts and extraordinary action, between stagnant systems and significant change, between the world we have and a world that's better, there's a gap. And somewhere along your journey to reach your goals, to build a better business, or to make your slice of the world a better place, you're going to be faced with that gap. And you'll need to have creativity to overcome it, but you're also going to need to be willing to welcome risk with open arms. And that brings me to a personal story. I have a sister, unfortunately, No, actually, it's quite fortunate. She's a wonderful, beautiful, talented person. And when she was 3, she was diagnosed with leukemia. Now, I'm sure you can imagine that not many 3-year-olds are fighting cancer, and my parents were terrified, obviously. And I was only 5 at the time. My brother was 6 months old, so their time was constantly split between the 3 of us, my brother and I at home and her in the hospital. And not to mention that they had to keep everything together at work and maintain their general composure. But part of my sister's treatment was to receive chemotherapy, which she mistakenly referred to as king of therapy, which it kind of is, actually. But anyway, one of the well-known side effects of this treatment is that it makes your hair fall out. And my parents were concerned about a lot of things at the time, but they didn't really know how to go about talking to my sister about this happening. They just didn't know how a 3-year-old was going to react. And so they decided instead of trying to explain it to her, they would just show her one day and let her see what happened. So she underwent the treatment. Her hair fell out pretty much immediately. And my dad picked her up off the bed and took her over to the mirror. And my parents told her what was going on. And she took one look in the mirror and started laughing. And I think that is such a good example of how we should address risk, to be willing to laugh in the face of uncertainty. And I just think that that's a good metaphor to keep in mind, and that my sister's ability to stare down risk, to look fear in the face, and to be faced with uncertainty and challenge, and to laugh at it all the same, I think is a good metaphor for us. And that attitude can help us overcome the risks and fears that we face, whether they're in business or elsewhere. Now, yesterday we talked a little bit about the aversion to risk, and it was mentioned specifically with regards to Central Europe, but I think that a lot of regions in the world view risk sort of as the Medusa of the business world, so to speak. It's widely regarded as a demon. Everyone knows it's there. No one wants to look in the eye because they think their career will turn to stone. And I would argue that the only group of people that actually view risk in the right way are children. Now, I don't have any children, but I was one at one time. And speaking from experience, I think that kids are brilliant. They disregard all assumptions because they have none. They explore whatever interests and excites them purely because it interests and excites them. And they have no fear of failure because they're too busy trying to explore things that they may be passionate about. And yesterday, I had the opportunity to hear Morten Lund speak in his working session. I'm looking forward to hearing him speak again later today. And he said that this is the one distinction that I want to make with regards to risk, that failure is not okay. And I agree with that. There's been a lot of discussion around failure and how you need to be willing to fail. And I think that in the back of our minds, we have to understand that being an agent of change does not mean that you accept failure. It just means that you're not scared of it. Now, I heard a quote recently by Professor Ken Robinson, and he made a really good point. He said that if you're not willing to be wrong, then you'll never come up with anything original. And I would like to tweak that just a bit to say if you don't have the courage to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. Because to me, that's what it takes, is courage to build a better business, to overcome the fear of failure, but also to have enough courage to say that I can be successful in what I'm going after. Now, what's sad about this is that I think currently there's a bit of a misalignment between what we perceive as risky and what is actually risky. To me, it's kind of come to the point that we think that risk is just an opportunity for failure in a lot of organizations. And I think that risk it's not laughing when something's funny, it's not dancing when you hear music, it's not making a change when you have the opportunity to do so, or experiencing the world and taking action when the opportunity is there. So point 2 out of all this is that risk is, to me, what's risky is losing opportunity, not potentially failing. And so agents of change embrace risk. The final point that I would like to make is that being an agent of change means that you're eager to give back. And I'm sure we've all had these moments every once in a while where things kind of come full circle for you and your past and present are linked. And I had one recently, and it was in Poland, of all places, and it involved a man named Henry Landworth. Now, Henry grew up in Belgium, and he would have had a perfectly normal childhood, but at age 13, he was taken with his family to Auschwitz. And his story there is a tale in itself, obviously, but the reason that we're talking about Henry is because of everything that happened afterwards. So he escaped the camp and the war ended. He started working on a freight and crossed the Atlantic Ocean, showed up in the United States with $20 US and no knowledge of the English language. He joined the US Army and used his military benefits to learn how to learn the hospitality business. He started working in a hotel and then displayed some entrepreneurial spirit. He bribed everyone in the hotel to let him do their job so that he could learn all the different facets. He gave the accountant a bottle of whiskey. After that, he moved to Florida, opened up his own chain of hotels, and pretty soon he had a hotel outside NASA Space Center, next to Disney World, and his business started booming. And while it's a remarkable story that someone could come from that and be that successful, what makes Henry remarkable in my mind is not that he was successful, but that he decided to give back. Because if there's anyone who could have decided to keep their success for themselves, decided to hoard their individual achievement, it was Henry. His family was taken from him, his parents were murdered, his childhood was ruined, and instead of keeping success, he decided to give back. And so with every business success, he gave back more and more. He founded a scholarship foundation for young science students. He founded a senior citizen center in honor of his mother, a children's school in Orlando, a program for underprivileged children in Israel, a clothing company for the homeless and abused, and the organization that impacted my family, Give Kids the World. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Give Kids the World grants the one wish of children with cancer. So for my sister, it was to see Minnie Mouse. So they flew my family to Disney World, and my sister had a special meet and greet with Minnie, and I got to skip to the front of the line on every ride in the park. And I was talking to my mom on the phone the other day about this, and I could hear it in her voice, just the impact that this event made. And there are bigger things than flying a family to Disney World or going to a theme park for a week. But it just made such an impact, and the joy that was provided was given because of what Henry did. And he was suffering so much just half a century before. And so the point here is that agents of change focus on giving. And I have no doubt that everyone in this room is talented and driven and brilliant and maintains the skills necessary to be successful in business or science, technology, whatever it may be. But I think that if you want to move beyond being just a successful business person and move towards being an agent of change, you have to give back. And I encourage you to give as much as you can. That doesn't mean that you have to start a nonprofit or help children with cancer or get into social entrepreneurship, but I know that there's something here that everyone can give. Now, to conclude, I just want to remind you of a couple things. The framework in the essay outlines what it means, or how a way to become an agent of change, using entrepreneurship as an example. And I think that entrepreneurship is important, but I also think that the things that we just talked about transcend business. And I think it's important not that I tell you how to do these things, but just that we simply remember to do these things. The late US President John F. Kennedy once said that children are the greatest resource and our best hope for the future. And I think that that's perfectly true, but if children are the best hope for the future, then adults are the best hope for the present. And specifically those adults that wish to be an agent of change. And so, in my mind, being an agent of change means making the world better, not just different. And so as leaders of tomorrow, I ask only that you develop the skill of creativity, that you embrace risk and laugh in the face of uncertainty, and that you give as much as you can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very good. Thanks.
Well done.
Excellent speech. Great essay. We move on to the next first prize winner, whose name is Ainur Begim. And Ainur she was born in Kazakhstan, but she grew up in many other regions in the former Soviet Union. And she's a Ph.D. student at Yale University in anthropology, specializing in the anthropology of finance, figuring out what traders do. That's very interesting. And she has studied psychology, sociology, religion, which also gives you a very good basis for anthropology. And her winner essay is entitled, "What Makes an Entrepreneur an Agent of Change?" And the jury felt specifically about this essay that it was, of course, again, very well written. It was also based on personal experience, but it carries a very important message. And that is that if you travel through the world, actually the way that entrepreneurship is understood and practiced differs quite greatly from nation to nation. And we have to be sometimes very, very aware of these differences in the practice of entrepreneurship. And we're looking very much forward to hearing more about that. Thank you.
So, being the tallest of the three, we decided I'd go last. Well, good afternoon. It's truly such a great pleasure to be here. I would like to thank the jury and the International Students Committee, especially Rolf, Dominic, and Sebastian for their hard work and for putting this truly magnificent and absolutely unique event together. So before I proceed with my remarks, I just would like to say one thing. Participating in this symposium has been truly enlightening. To be with people who are so engaged, so committed, and so passionate about what they do, about what they study, and what they hope to accomplish in the future. So it's a great honor and great pleasure to be sharing this wonderful, amazing event with all of you. So I thank you for being here. Now, I would like to begin my remarks by suggesting an alternative way of looking at entrepreneurship, and that is through the lens of culture. You all might be thinking, of course she's speaking about culture. She is an anthropologist. But the importance and relevance of cultural and social factors was brought home truly to me, not through my studies of economics, psychology, and anthropology when I was a student at Bates College, but when I was working on Wall Street during the financial crisis. Because the thing is, banking is truly a very unique culture, and I think we can all agree with that there is much to be learned from banking, about banking, and that it's just a very fascinating and mesmerizing topic. A British human geographer, Nigel Thrift, argues that economics as a discipline deserves more cultural study than it currently receives, and I quote, "Because economic knowledge is itself a very powerful actor in the world, and not just a representation of it." The end of quote. Likewise, I believe that entrepreneurship deserves more cultural studies because cross-cultural differences are deeply embedded and are constantly reshape entrepreneurial activities around the world. So, in order to tackle the question of what constitutes entrepreneurship, let me briefly revisit and reconsider Joseph Schumpeter's legacy. Schumpeter is undoubtedly the thinker that is most closely associated with this topic. He defined the entrepreneur as the agent of change, innovator, and risk-taker. The Schumpeterian entrepreneur is an individualistically minded, risk-taking, and creative genius who benefits society by pushing for greater economic development through the process called creative destruction. Now, if we look closely and think deeply about Schumpeter's work, it really becomes clear that this definition is very historical and very Western in its conception. To borrow and reapply the British cultural theorist Stuart Hall's commentary on globalization, I like to say Schumpeterian entrepreneurship is centered on the West, and it always speaks English. In the world that is increasingly dominated by non-Western societies such as China and India, this definition becomes, quite frankly, limited. So, in my opinion, the distinctive feature of entrepreneurship in the 21st century is hybridity. And by hybridity, I mean an ability to adapt global entrepreneurial practices to local conditions. So now let's take a look at the place where I was born, the former Soviet Union, as an example of hybridity. After the breakup of the USSR, post-Soviet entrepreneurs became engaged in capitalist practices while still heavily relying on training, knowledge, and skills, as well as connections that they received under the communist regime. With economic capital very difficult to come by, these entrepreneurs made use of what French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu calls social capital, and that is personal relations, family duties, and bonds of friendship. But Soviet entrepreneurs also relied on something that Bourdieu calls cultural capital. And Bourdieu believes, and I agree with him, that culture shares with economic capital many characteristics. And in particular, cultural capital can be used like money because cultural habits and norms can be translated into social resources, such as education, status, and power. In the case of post-Soviet entrepreneurs, education and training helped to ensure success in the entrepreneurial activities. These entrepreneurs took advantages of whatever little resources they had, however little they seemed at the time, and put them to use in the newly free market economy. So the lesson that can be drawn from their experiences is that it's not enough to just simply copy a Western business model. Western entrepreneurial approaches cannot simply be grafted onto other cultures. Starting a business in the post-Soviet region, or any other place for that matter, requires creativity, cultural sensitivity, and a great deal of patience. Combining this cultural approach with Western efficiency, business ethics, appropriate technology, and environmental awareness is what constitutes hybrid entrepreneurship. every nation defines entrepreneurship in its own way, adapting and enriching the definition. The experience of the 15 post-Soviet nation states also contributed to the conceptualization of entrepreneurship, enriching and expanding its definition. These developments signify that entrepreneurship is no longer just a Western concept, but a truly global model. And every practitioner, which means all of us, we can make his or her own contribution to what it truly means to be entrepreneurial and innovative in the 21st century and beyond. Now, I think here it's important to note that globalization is often seen as this very homogenizing force that is erasing differences, sapping away traditions and cultures, and thus maintaining a global order. And while we can all agree that technology and media certainly make it easier for us to be all connected, globalization is by no means so powerful as to erase differences, disable nation states, and streamline all business practices into one. I think we should approach the globalization discourse more productively and try to think and imagine entrepreneurship, capitalism, and nation states in new ways. And that's why I think it's useful to think of hybridity, because it really draws attention to cultural differences and unique models of development without losing track of interconnections and global outlooks of entrepreneurs today. Now, financial analysts, entrepreneurs, academics, I think we all have to remain nimble, be culturally tuned, and willing to revise our thinking to reorient ourselves conceptually in this ever-changing world. Well, perhaps in this task, the entrepreneurs have the upper hand because of their propensity to think outside of the box, but all of us should not lag behind. Now, to conclude my remarks, I wish to draw on one last thought for my essay. Entrepreneurial thinking, in my opinion, does not have to be confined to business only. As one of the symposium speakers said, being entrepreneurial goes far beyond one's career and work. Likewise, I believe that entrepreneurship should be considered in the wider sense. At the close of the first decade of the 21st century, I think it's very important to take a look at our conceptual baggage, to make sure that our definition of entrepreneurship reflects modern realities and helps us to make sense of this ever-changing world and succeed within it. I think the term entrepreneurship should be considered more broadly as an activity that can be undertaken in many spheres, including business. Anyone who approaches his or her life, career, and social relations in a creative and thoughtful fashion is an entrepreneur. To survive and to succeed in today's world, we all have to become leaders of an enterprise called life. The stakes are high, but so are the rewards. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. Well, you know, it's sort of hard for me to actually imagine that all of you guys were actually born after the death of the typewriter. It's really amazing. Imagine that. I mean, the typewriter basically died in 1980, I think, when the personal computer came along, and you were born, all born in the 80s. Very, very remarkable feat, excellent intellectual capabilities, great analysis, and also some very, very good foresight, and I think frameworks for us to think about entrepreneurship. I'd like to open up for some Q&A. I'd like to open up to the audience. If you have some pressing questions, I'm sure that you have a lot of questions that you would like to address to the authors. I see some very active hand. Anybody has? It's a little difficult to see from down here. Is anybody sort of no volunteers? Okay. In that case, let me kick off with the first question. I mean, don't be embarrassed to ask questions, even though they're very strong here. I mean, some researchers in the US recently tried to submit a paper to one of the entrepreneurship journals, and they said that, you know, entrepreneurship is some sort of genetic, it's kind of a genetic business. There is an entrepreneurial gene that determines whether or not somebody can become an entrepreneur. Do you believe in that thesis, or would you reject it?
Well, I mentioned DNA in my essay, actually. And I think there is some truth in that the parents and where you're coming from as an entrepreneurial context actually helps entrepreneurial spirit. But my personal story is my parents are both teachers and have been working for public organizations, grandparents, and still I was exposed to entrepreneurial spirit at my universities, for instance. So I think it's rather about being exposed to entrepreneurship through your life that helps facilitate it, rather than DNA, which is really inside you from the very day on.
Yeah. James, you also had some?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the social environment argument. I think that it does make a lot of difference, you know, where you grow up and what you're influenced by when you're younger. But I think it's more of a balance, too. I do view it as a cap. I mean, I think that people are born with, I don't know, a certain internal desire to either be an entrepreneur or not, or be a leader or not. And I know that we can develop those skills, but there are certain caps. It's kind of similar to the creativity that I talked about. I mean, some people are more creative than others, and some people are more inclined to be a leader or be an entrepreneur. But that doesn't mean that you can't develop the skill, just if you're not, you know, if you weren't genetically predisposed, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I agree with the remarks that have been said. I think it's, you know, we often tend to oscillate between these 2 points, you know, if it's capitalism, socialism, nurture, culture. I think it's truly is the balance. And also I think chance, I mean, pure chance how things work out. So I think it's, I think I would say probably social environment. I would probably put more weight to social environment.
Right.
You know, just some of the speakers who were here, they noted that it's very easy to be an entrepreneur from an early age. But I think behind that very young, genius, Schumpeterian entrepreneur, there is mom and dad who might be entrepreneurs themselves that have been helping and supporting with advice and all the other resources.
Yeah, some sort of role model is probably important in this thing. But do you think actually that we can train entrepreneurship? I mean, at business schools, universities, at the ETH, we also have a large program for trying to train our students to become entrepreneurial. Do you think we can train people? And if yes, what is essential in such a program?
Well, my personal opinion is, yes, you can train it, but you have to experience it. So, I mean, theoretically, we can talk a lot about what entrepreneurs are and if they have common DNA or something, but you really have to have the chance, for instance, during your university studies, to test it.
Right.
I mean, found a company.
Yeah.
Just do it during your first year and then reflect on what you've learned during your failure or maybe your success.
Yeah.
So it's about this experience rather than about the theoretical background of it, and then reflect on it.
See, what I got out of that is that I'm not sure if you can. I feel like you have to do it.
Yeah.
But an interesting point was made yesterday in one of the work sessions that I think education on entrepreneurship can decrease the odds of failure, and I agree with that. You know, education is very powerful, and I think that you can train people to do or to follow a more correct path, so to speak. There's no exact right or wrong way to success, but I think that, you know, you can educate people to make smarter decisions.
So we should educate people, for example, in business planning. You know, then they will understand more of the factors that they have to look at, and probably we also have to include in our curriculum some sort of practice-based learning, right? Start your own company. Do I see some questions? Yeah, there is a very active hand up here. I'm sorry that I didn't see you actually before. Yes, please. There is a microphone on the way.
I guess throughout the symposium, we heard a lot about the words risk and also culture, and also in your essays. So I'm kind of curious, like structurally, how do you actually cultivate a cultural attitude change towards risks so that you can actually enable the ability of a society, of a culture, to laugh in the face of risk as you identified?
Excellent question. Who wants to go?
I guess I have to answer this since I since I said laugh in the face of risk. I think it goes back to, like I said before, the point was made that failure is not okay, and I agree with that. You know, I don't think that we should be accepting failure, and I think that the approach that's been mentioned before is that you should be willing to risk or willing to fail. I think that it's more having the courage to overcome your fear, and displaying the passion. And Mr. Koenigsegg, for the automobiles yesterday, mentioned that how bad do you want it? And I think that kind of applies there. It's not necessarily that that risk is something that you think about in regards to failure, but you're willing to take on risk because you want it that bad, because you're that passionate about it. And I think that's maybe the shift that we need, maybe away from something that focuses on the negativity of failure and more towards the positive associations with passion.
Yeah. What about risk perception, perhaps in different cultures? And
I guess I was thinking about it in a little bit of different notions. I guess I'm a very practice-oriented person, so I was thinking, how would you maybe do that? How would you nurture that sort of appetite for risk? And I think it's very hard. But I think ultimately you can do that. I think it's very difficult to teach that. I think it's very difficult to teach that at the university or if you take a course or whatever. I think it's more about practice. I think it's just, and when you're being trained to be a trader, and obviously we all know that traders need to take risks. We start by playing, by engaging in this. I wouldn't call it imaginary market, but this game, which is like market, right? So they play in and they bet, and then no money is being really spent or gained or lost. But that really gives them sort of a first chance to, to try what it means. And then I think you just escalate that, and I think that's a useful strategy. I think that's a useful strategy.
Yeah. There is another question up here. Yeah, a microphone is on the way.
Thank you. My name is Mathilde. I study at King's College London. We've talked a lot about risk, about failure, about many things, but I don't think we've addressed the idea of challenge in entrepreneurship. What is your opinion about simply wanting to take on a challenge in life?
Can I take that?
Yes, please go ahead.
It's funny. I think we don't talk about challenge because it's sort of embedded within entrepreneurship. If you are an entrepreneur, by default, you are taking on a challenge, right? So that would be my answer.
Yeah, I think it's a great point you just made, and I actually considered swapping out the word risk with challenge in the speech, and I firmly believe in that, and I think that's a very positive way of looking at it, in that I'm willing to challenge myself and excited about challenging myself. And that's maybe the answer to the previous question about how you address risk, is that you have a willingness to challenge yourself.
Sure, but I mean, both belong to the equation, right, of entrepreneurship, risk and challenge.
I was just going to say that in terms of how you deal with risk is a challenge. And my answer to both things would be we can try to lower the barriers. I mean, lower the opportunity cost to actually be exposed to start taking risks.
Right.
And this goes back to this experience and a lot of other ideas, such as role models, what we discussed yesterday. I mean, if you have role models and mentors on your side who actually take this risk or take this challenge, you become exposed to it, and you actually start replicating it.
Thank you. There is another one here.
My name's Alan. I'm Canadian from Harvard Law School. One thing I noticed in Christoph's speech was the emphasis on the idea that entrepreneurship doesn't come in a vacuum. It comes out of a network or a group. And I was wondering, in the last 2 days, we've often been discussing an entrepreneur as sort of a knight on a hill, one individual, one man or one woman who's making all of these change. Should we be thinking about ways that our culture can, or our cultures can emphasize not just one person, but groups taking risks together, and the kind of societal entrepreneurship?
Interesting collective risk-taking, yes?
Yes, I agree. We should. The entire idea of what we address with the idea of the hub and eventually the essay then is this collective entrepreneurship and getting together with other people, not necessarily doing the same thing that you are doing, but just having the same visions or some same values, and then work together. Someone in the same place, maybe in a meeting, maybe separated, but then come together. Yeah. But really getting people together and not talk about this one only star entrepreneur. So I totally agree on that.
Yeah, I think these technoparks, for example, they also show that entrepreneurs have a lot to learn from each other, and they also give a moral support to each other, which is instrumental kind of for going on, you know, also in face of failure very often. We have time for one last question, and there is somebody here. Yes, please, sir.
Hi guys, I'm Paul King from the US Hercules Networks. I'd like to ask a tough question, but I think it's an important question in this context. So there's this whole symposium has been about entrepreneurship and, you know, go do it. But you guys have all delved into the subject of entrepreneurship and have all understood the, you know, what it takes to be an entrepreneur. But you're not currently entrepreneurs. So I want to ask you to kind of dive inside your own psychology and help us understand why you're not an entrepreneur today, or do you want to be an entrepreneur in the future, or is that out of your own, or is that not even something you want to do?
I think this is a great question, and please formulate your answer to the question as your last statement of this panel. We'll start with you, Ainur.
Okay, great question. And it's actually, you know, I mean, in my speech today and in the essay, I said that I think it's important to think about entrepreneurship more widely. You know, you may not be an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, you may not be the one starting a business, but it doesn't mean that this will not happen in the future, or that you cannot entrepreneurially and creatively and innovatively approach some other aspect of your life. So I do not think that we should be necessarily constraining ourselves in these boundaries. But then again, I'm right now studying to get my Ph.D., but I can easily see how you can combine both. And I think being here and listening to all these inspiring stories, I think I would love to become one. So thanks for your question.
You know, we academics can also sometimes be entrepreneurial, actually.
Yeah, it's a great point. You know, we're sort of like the blind leading those who can see, right? For me, at least the basis for my paper and the speech that I gave, being an entrepreneur in many ways is the same as being a leader. And so I may not have started my own business yet, and I would like to in the future, but I would like to think that I have been able to be a leader in some respect, and that I've been able to challenge myself in the past. And so that's sort of the basis for what I've said. And so those are the experiences that I drew upon. And whether or not they're in the business world, I think that they do translate in some respect. And so that was kind of the foundation for the things that I said.
Yeah, I think there's a lot about self-perception. So during this co-founding of the hub, actually, I mean, it started that I actually thought, okay, I might be an entrepreneur now. I didn't even know it. But if you're engaged in it, the more and more you really, I mean, shift aside all the other things, and you just focus on this one thing that you do, and then it goes back to self-perception, and maybe you feel like an entrepreneur. And as an objective point of view, if you look at what you're doing when you get up in the morning and what really motivates you in the morning, I think you can answer the question for yourself, actually. I mean, you are an entrepreneur when you try to innovate those things, and when this keeps you getting up in the morning and being motivated.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we come to the more formal part of the awards ceremony, and that is actually where we hand over the awards per se. This is Christoph Birkholz, right? So, Christoph, for the third prize. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. James. James and Ainur. Very well done. Thank you. Thank you much. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the excellent authors of these essays. They gave us a lot of pleasure, allowing us to read their material, as well as all the other participants in the contest. I would also like to very warmly thank the pre-jury, They had a lot of different essays, headed by Professor Müller-Stevens at St. Gallen University. They had a lot of different essays to review, and also the jury that helped us to identify the 3 winners. I would like also to thank specifically Mr. Bachmann for excellent assistance to us here in the jury, and also the panel winners, and also the rest of the IIC team. As always, this has been a great pleasure. My only word to you is the following. We have talked about entrepreneurship being about throwing away the box, or sort of thinking out of the box a lot. My suggestion would be to throw the box away altogether and really start to think anew about industries and markets. Thank you very much also for participating in the session. Thank you.